Imagine a superpower brought to its knees, forced into a humiliating treaty, its lands carved up, its pride shattered. This was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1672. The mighty Ottoman Empire had them on the ropes, forcing them to sign the Treaty of Bukak. Not only did they lose vast territories, but they were also reduced to the status of a vassal, paying tribute to the Sultan. For many, this was the end. The Commonwealth, once a major European power, seemed destined to fade into history. But one man refused to accept this fate. His name was Jan Sobieski, the Grand Hetman of the Crown. He saw the treaty not as an end, but as an unacceptable disgrace that had to be erased, while the Polish parliament, the same, was paralyzed by infighting and political chaos. Sobieski took matters into his own hands. He declared the treaty void and began the monumental task of rebuilding the army. With the treasury empty and the country in disarray, it was a near impossible mission. Yet, through sheer force of will, charisma, and his own personal funds, Sobieski started to forge a new weapon, one capable of standing against the Ottoman juggernaut. He didn't just rebuild the old army, he revolutionized it. Sobieski was a military genius who understood that defeating the Ottomans required a new way of thinking. He created a hybrid force that combined the best of East and West. The iconic winged hussars, the most feared heavy cavalry in Europe, formed the hammer, but he supported them with a modernized anvil, Western-style infantry armed with muskets and pikes, and a powerful artillery train that could pound enemy fortifications into dust. This wasn't just about brute force. It was about creating a flexible, multi-layered army that could adapt to any situation. Sobieski's genius wasn't limited to army composition. His logistical planning was meticulous. He knew the Ottomans expected a campaign in the spring or summer, following the traditional rules of warfare. So, he planned for winter. He chose lesser-known difficult routes to move his army, ensuring the element of surprise. While his political rivals in Warsaw were bickering, Sobieski was quietly moving his pieces into place, preparing to strike when and where the enemy least expected it. His target was the fortress of Khotyn, a strategic stronghold on the Dniester River, the very place where the Ottomans had been checked over 50 years earlier. Now, it was occupied by a massive Ottoman army, and Sobieski was heading straight for it. In early November 1673, the two armies faced each other at Khotyn. On one side, about 35,000 Ottoman troops under the command of Hussein Pasha, secure inside a well-fortified camp. On the other, Sobieski's newly forged army of around 30,000 Poles and Lithuanians. The Ottomans were confident. They outnumbered their opponents. They held a strong defensive position, and they believed the harsh winter weather would cripple any Polish attack. The Polish-Lithuanian soldiers were shivering in the freezing mud and biting winds. Morale was dangerously low. Many questioned Sobieski's sanity for attempting a winter campaign. The situation looked bleak, but Sobieski saw opportunity where others saw despair. He knew his enemy's weaknesses. The Ottoman army was not a unified force. It was a mix of elite but conservative janissaries who resisted new tactics, and unmotivated troops from vassal states like Wallachia and Moldavia, who had little reason to die for the Sultan. Hussein Pasha was an administrator, not a battlefield commander, and he underestimated the man facing him. Sobieski also knew that the very weather tormenting his own troops was an even greater enemy to the less prepared Ottomans, who were used to warmer climates. For 2 days, Sobieski's artillery relentlessly pounded the Ottoman camp, not just to inflict damage, but to wear them down mentally and physically, denying them sleep and shattering their nerve. Then, on the night of November 10th, the weather turned. A sudden, vicious cold snap swept through the region. The temperature plummeted, and a fierce, freezing wind howled across the plains. The Ottomans, huddled in their tents, were exhausted, demoralized, and frozen. This was the moment Sobieski had been waiting for. In the pre-dawn darkness of November 11th, under the cover of the raging storm, he gave the order to attack. The Polish-Lithuanian forces surged forward in an all-out assault. The surprise was absolute. The Ottomans, caught completely off guard, stumbled out of their tents into a nightmare of cannon fire and charging infantry. Sobieski's plan was a masterpiece of combined arms. His infantry pinned down the Ottoman center, while his cavalry, including the legendary winged hussars, smashed into their flanks. The Ottoman lines, brittle from the cold and the bombardment, began to crumble almost immediately. The janissaries fought with their usual ferocity, but they were isolated and overwhelmed. The vassal troops, seeing the chaos, either broke and fled or switched sides. What followed was not a battle. It was a systematic annihilation. The Ottoman command structure collapsed. Hüseyin Pasha, realizing all was lost, abandoned his army and fled across the Dniester River on the only pontoon bridge. As the terrified Ottoman soldiers tried to follow him, chaos erupted. The bridge, overloaded with panicking men, horses, and wagons, collapsed into the icy river. Thousands were swept away and drowned. Those trapped on the Polish side of the river were now completely cut off. With Sobieski's army closing in, they were shown no mercy. The massacre was horrific. The frozen ground turned red with blood. When the dust settled, the scale of the victory was staggering. The entire Ottoman army at Khotyn had been effectively destroyed. Out of 35,000 soldiers, it's estimated that between 20,000 and 30,000 were killed, drowned, or captured. The Polish-Lithuanian forces, in stark contrast, suffered only around 2,000 casualties. The casualty ratio was as high as 15-1. It was one of the most one-sided victories in European military history. Sobieski had captured the entire Ottoman camp, their treasury, and over 120 cannons. He had not just defeated an army, he had erased it. News of the victory at Khotyn sent shockwaves across Europe. For the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, it was a rebirth. The humiliation of the Treaty of Buchach was washed away in a tide of victory. National pride, so recently shattered, was restored in an instant. Just as news of the victory spread, word arrived that the Polish king had died. There was only one possible successor. The hero of Khotyn, Jan Sobieski, was elected King Jan III Sobieski. His victory had not only saved the nation, but it also won him a crown. The Ottoman advance had been stopped dead in its tracks, and the Commonwealth's borders were secured. For the Ottoman Empire, Khotyn was a strategic and psychological disaster. The defeat shattered the aura of invincibility that had surrounded their elite Janissary corps for centuries. It exposed deep weaknesses in their military command and their control over vassal states. The momentum that had carried them to the gates of Central Europe was gone. This defeat marked a critical shift in the balance of power. The tide had begun to turn. While the Battle of Vienna 10 years later, in 1683, is often remembered as the moment the Ottoman threat to Europe was broken with Sobieski once again playing the leading role, it was the victory at Khotyn in 1673 that made it all possible. Khotyn was the crucial first step. It was the moment the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth rose from its sickbed to prove it could still be the shield of Christendom. It was the day Jan Sobieski not only saved his country, but also began the long process of ending Ottoman dominance in Europe. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into military history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of epic battles and legendary commanders. See you next time.